And now a message from our friends at Fetching Food.
The 1970s and 80s had Elbow, Gravy Train, Purina, Meow Mix, and Bell Bottoms. You've changed your clothes, now change how you feed your pet. Like Bell Bottoms, kick the kibble and join us in the 21st century with the healthiest diet for dogs and cats. Feed naturally, feed raw, feed Fetching Foods.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Let's just start with me being your songwriter.
Let me ask you, have you ever written a song before?
Yep.
And is that your music stuff outside?
Yep. Oh no!
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled and informative episode of the Groomer Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Chris Green, and joining us this week is Dr. Dana Tomlinson. He is a nutritionist and knows so much about dermatology in our dogs, our cats, and even farm animals, which I find this to be very interesting. But before he enters the studio, I wanted to go over something really quick. The following behaviors of symptoms that are signs that may signal a skin disorder in your pets are as followed: excessive scratching, repeated rubbing of the face or ears, chewing or biting on their skin, scooting or rubbing against carpet or other surfaces. Now that does actually have a little bit of a sidebar, which if they're scooting their butt, that's probably because their anal glands are compacted and they need to be expressed. So just keep that in mind. Then the next one is red, irritated skin or sores, excessive licking or of the legs or feet or body, and last but not least, flaky, dry skin. And you all know that I'm going to start with the fact that it starts always with nutrition. That's the roadmap. It always starts at point A. Then, and we will go into this, then is environmental, and so on and so on and so on. But I always want to, point that out. And if your dogs or your cats are having some issue, they're living in pain, and that's the one thing we want to avoid. So, of course, just trying to get information out there so that everybody can be aware of it. And by that sound, Dr. Tomlinson is about to enter the podcast studio. So with that said, welcome Dr. Tomlinson to the podcast.
Oh, hello. Hold on a sec. Dad, we have a guest on the podcast.
This week on the podcast, we have Dr. Dana Tomlinson, and he's going to be talking a lot about dermatology, and in our, not just our four-legged little furry friends, but also in farm animals, which I find to be very interesting. So thank you for taking the time and being on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Well, let's get started with the simple question, and that is, what made you want to become a doctor? Were you a young kid when it came about, or was it something that came about when you were in your teens, or just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life?
Well, interestingly enough, I kind of grew into it. I grew up on a farm in northeast Ohio, and I always knew that I wanted to study in science. But I'd actually gone back home and was a dairyman for a couple of years, and we just weren't big enough to make a living with 40 cows. So I went back to school to get a master's degree, and once I was there, they convinced me I needed to stay and get a PhD in animal nutrition. So it was kind of a progression, but certainly a wonderful experience. And I did that at Virginia Tech.
Nice.
Got my undergrad at the Ohio State University, so got a little bit of diversity in my education.
Well, diversity is always what matters, and that's honestly what makes an intelligent person actually brilliant. And I've noticed over the years that that's the component is you go to school, you get what you need, but then you get more education somewhere else. And I don't know what there is about it. It's almost like it just fits perfect. So,
Well, that's right. I mean, I think the big thing that you learn in school is you learn how to learn.
yeah, yeah, that is a helpful hint. So for all you kids
Yep.
out there, school helps you learn to learn. And then honestly,
Exactly.
I understand what you mean by that, because when you're in regular elementary, junior high, high school, you're not taught the how to learn. You're just taught, here's the facts, figure it out, go. It's not until you go to college.
Right, and so much of it is rote memorization, not how to evaluate and truly apply knowledge
Yes.
and learn from the information that's out there.
One thing that I would say probably is lacking in our regular education is that there's not enough lectures. Where when you go into university, that's where the lectures happen. That's where you really learn what principle goes into it and how facts come up. It's all in a book when you're in regular school. And that's what I've never understood. That K to 12, it just doesn't have a lot of in-depth or even anything that's relatable. So it's always interesting when I talk to somebody, especially a doctor, who went through the whole process, and a lot of the education was lectures. And I always find that to be very interesting.
Exactly. Well, and that's one of the big things that you do learn in graduate school is how to teach the information, or more importantly, and most of what we have to teach, Chris, is not information that has a lot of it in the book. So you have to go out and gather the information, just like today we're talking about skin or dermatological challenges. And a lot of that, you have to go out and collect the information because there's just not a lot of printed information. So you got to go out and collect the information, kind of boil it down, and then present it so that people can understand it.
That's the challenge right there. Getting it so people can understand it.
Yep.
And,
exactly.
That's the fact of it is that the principal knowledge is the science. And the only way to get that 1 + 1 = is by the science. And it's kind of odd that it's 2019 and we're still not completely understanding this whole realm of furry friends and what their anatomy can and cannot handle. On top of that, the fact that they're having so many dermatology, you know which word I'm going with that.
Dermatological.
That's the word. Boy, that one was a tricky one. Issues that it's so hard to put a finger on it, and from a lot of doctors' standpoints, they're still baffled by it.
Well, and I think some of the challenge behind that, in defense of our medical, or more important, or more defined our veterinary medical industry, is that their solution many times, not all the time, but many times, is to try to treat it with a medication, just because that's what they have kind of at their fingertips. Where from a consumer standpoint or from a pet parent standpoint, the understanding really needs to be to drill into or research or really just pay attention to those factors, whether it's nutrition, whether it's environment. What are those challenges that are causing these skin or dermatological challenges in our pets?
That seems to be the challenge. And you're right. A lot of typical clinics are saying, here's an antifungal shampoo, and that will take away all the problems. Now, I'm not going to criticize it and say it doesn't work, because it does. But wouldn't you say and I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but to my opinion, and you can agree, you can say I'm an idiot, I'm totally fine with it, but it feels like an antifungal, especially when a lot of the situations are nutrition based. It feels like the antifungal is more of a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound than anything else.
Well, that's right, Chris. The thing that people need to understand is many of these challenges that we see, if we're looking at skin and coat challenges, are really starting from the inside out.
Yep.
So, if you're treating it with an antifungal shampoo or some kind of medication, you really are putting a Band-Aid on the issue, but you're not fixing the issue. And the issue is starting from the inside out of the animal. And that's where, coming back to our initial discussion, which I think was spot on, is where you have to be, you have to take the time to dig in and do some research to find out, and research is not specifically Googling things, all right? Research may be paying attention to, what is my dog lying on? What is my dog eating? What is my dog exposed to? What kind of grass is in your yard? What kind of trees are in the neighborhood in which you are walking your dog? Or what kind of weeds are growing at the time of year at which your dog's suffering with these challenges? Because interestingly enough, dogs and cats have almost all the same allergies that we have as humans.
Yep.
And so as you see your dog, you say, oh, well, my dog has no itchiness, maybe in the wintertime, and then spring rolls around and I don't understand why my dog breaks out. And they just happen to change brands of dog food. So, it's the dog food. But it may be the fact that there's all this pollen on the trees, there's, as you say, depending on where you are, it may be pine pollen. It could be, whatever trees are blooming or flowers are blooming or weeds are blooming. So that's why, where I kind of jokingly say you do have to do some research. And hopefully your veterinarian can help you with that or help explain that. But even veterinarians sometimes are naive to these challenges.
Yep, that is true. That is true. And again, there are some, and I'm going to say this, and again, agree, disagree, but not all doctors graduate top of their class. So...
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I just recently heard a young man that was thinking about going to vet school, and he was worried that he wasn't going to finish it, in the top of his class. And this older gentleman said, you know what how they introduce every person that graduates from a vet school, regardless of whether they were top to bottom, as doctor.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
There it is.
Or as they say, Chris, C's get degrees,
Oh, man, I do find out.
You're still a doctor with a C versus finishing summa cum laude, You're still a doctor.
You are still. But so I always jump into that, and I always find it funny. And, I joke about it because here's the simple fact. Everybody I talk to, I know you're all smart. So you're not in that list. So I don't have to worry. I'm not going to offend you. You already know you're smart and you've already established yourself. So we're talking about that other person. That person you probably know. We're talking about them.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
So what would you say is your specialty? Would you say that you're more prone to large animals, like your farm? Or are you one of those that are like, okay, I like my dogs and cats? Or would you just say you're a universal veterinarian who pretty much likes to say, I practice in all different furry friends?
Well, for starters, I'm not a veterinarian. I'm actually a PhD nutritionist.
Okay.
So Greg might have misled you a little bit, but I come at it from the nutritional standpoint, and that's why earlier I said that many of these challenges that we're talking about or trying to address, whether it's through nutrition or medicine, many of them have roots from a nutritional or a metabolic aspect.
But, I will say this. I'll say this. For your experience and your knowledge, you're not far off of the practicing veterinarian. You understand the anatomy. You understand how to treat. You understand what the right buttons are to push. So, yeah, I guess in some sense it's me misunderstanding the whole thing. But the thing is that you're still knowledgeable and you're still a doctor.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I when you get a PhD, a lot of people don't realize you're taking courses alongside many of the same students that are either in vet school or are going to go to vet school. And so, yeah, we all kind of get the same education. It's just veterinarians tend to go off into the surgery and more of the anatomy courses, where we tend to go off into the biochemistry and more of the nutritional challenges of life.
So that would actually probably make you more knowledgeable then. And here's how I come to this conclusion. So you understand what's in the food. And that's the component that I go with.
That's exactly right. Because the difference in our education, we get the biochemistry of nutrition. So you're spot on, Chris. People understand how the different components of diet, if we're talking specifically about dermatological challenges, different components in the diet may influence the production, maintenance, and/or repair of healthy skin and coat.
Which I will jump into this. Now, for starters, don't anybody check your phone. We are having a little bit of technical difficulties on our line, but I'm pretty sure it's just a momentary thing. So if everybody's going, well, this is kind of going a little out, it's not your set, it's just part of our connection. The next thing about that, though, is a lot of veterinarians, and I'm not putting anybody down. It's not like that, but the easiest thing to answer, and going back to even antifungal, is, well, let's get you on a prescription diet. And personally, and again, I only play a veterinarian on a podcast or a nutritionist or even on the radio, so I don't actually have that degree. But from my knowledge of reading the ingredients, it's not anything different than what you can buy in stores. Maybe a smidge above what the ingredients are in stores. And I just don't understand how that is the answer to helping in a dermatology problem.
Well, that's correct. If you can specifically about the diet in itself, say a prescription diet, and that's correct. There are only so many ingredients available to make pet food. And majority of pet food manufacturers know and understand that. And nutritionists that are formulating those allergenic diets, they work for multiple companies, not just for three of them that specifically produce, say, a prescription diet. So you're spot on, Chris. Those ingredients are available to everyone. And yes, just because you buy it at the veterinarian does not necessarily mean that it has anything that's remotely different than what you could buy, say, at a mass retailer. It also has is marketed for those anti-allergy aspects.
Again, we are still having a little bit of trouble on our end. Just kind of giving you
is my voice breaking out?
A little bit. Yeah,
hearing me?
Just a little bit. We're kind of having a little bit of a break, a little interference on that end. So just to let you know. All right. So we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're back. So let's go back to what we were talking about. We were talking about Zinpro.
So Zinpro we're a company that manufactures trace minerals, and what's unique about our trace minerals is they're patented trace minerals that have we've been in the business for 50 years. And what's unique about the minerals that we make is we make minerals in the form that is exactly what your body's or our pet's body is looking for an optimal absorption process. And that's unique. I mean, it's where the metal is bound to individual amino acids, or specifically to the pet industry, our original product is Zinpro zinc methionine. And why would that be important? Well, if you look at it with DCM or the dilated cardiomyopathy. And what's interesting about that is for the dog to produce taurine, it needs methionine. And so we actually complex or ionically bind, in layman's terms, the zinc to a methionine molecule. So your dog or your cat doesn't only get the zinc, it also gets the methionine that it needs to be able to produce taurine, which is critical to its overall health. And we've been in the business of making these trace minerals for a long time and have proven efficacy of our products across all species. I mean, as I jokingly say, we're from A to Z from an animal standpoint, all the way from aqua to zoo animals. I mean, I've been out and consulted with the veterinarians and the nutritionists at the San Diego Zoo for use of the Zinpro minerals. So it's kind of a crazy thing, but our minerals work in all animals, and we sell all over the world. We're in over 70 countries around the world. Wow. Trying to improve animal health and well-being. That's really what we're all about.
Well, no animal, whether it's farm animal or it's one of ours in our house, should ever suffer. That's not a way of life. So it doesn't matter if it's a lion, which I don't know if you've treated a lion before, but I'm just throwing out there, a cow, chicken, whatever, or a dog or cat. They should never live a life of pain. Or can you just imagine what it would be to have that dermatitis problem of where you're scratching all the time? And in a dog's case or a cat's, they're just going to lick or bite at it the whole time until, well, another problem arises.
Well, that's exactly right, Chris. And so one of the things that we've done is conducted research looking at, hey, can we supplement dogs and help them become more resilient to development of one of the biggest challenges that we see in pets today is this canine atopic dermatitis. I mean, it is second only to fleas in its challenge around the world. And so it's a big problem. And what we've done is conducted research showing that with our zinc supplementation, we can actually reduce the dog's need for medical control of those issues. And you might be saying as a pet parent, well, wait a minute, you're giving this dog zinc. How can it do that? Well, it just demonstrates how significant zinc is in its role in producing healthy skin and helping that animal develop a fully competent immune system to withstand some of those allergens that we were talking about earlier in the conversation.
It's so interesting. I mean, when I first was approached by Greg, I right away, of course, when you talk about skin, especially in our dogs and cats, it becomes a hot topic for me, and I love to talk about it, obviously, because I always start everything off, and I've said it already maybe 3 or 4 times with nutrition. So I'm kind of curious, and it's for my own interest here, with, let's just say, a cow, or I'm sure a horse would be the same thing. What would be the issue that would cause any kind of dermatological issues with them?
Well, you tend to see it less in cows than you do in horses. And the reason that we see it more in horses is because horses initially are they have a monogastric stomach that is more similar to what we see in our dogs and cats. Where cows are a unique beast. I mean, they're a ruminant, all right? So they have this huge fermentation vat that is their first stomach. And cows have 4 stomachs. Mm-hmm. And cows are very, very different in that they have this huge mass of bacteria that are living in that first stomach or the rumen. that's there just to digest grasses. And because they have so much bacteria on the inside of them, they actually don't get a lot of skin problems because their immune system is developed to be able to handle that. Well, the flip side, you flip that over to the horse. The horse is more like the dog. And so we tend to see more of these skin challenges in horses because they don't have that bacterial mass in their digestive system. And so they tend to be more responsive or more easily irritated by bacterial populations that might grow out of control on their skin.
Interesting. That is interesting. And, I would put a horse and a cow together, and I would, just noticing their intake, and it looks to be the exact same, but when you break it down like that, it makes sense. I really never thought of it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, well, you tend to compare them because of size.
That too.
But digestively, they are remarkably different. They're not similar at all. Huh. Even though both of them may be eating grass, but they're not getting the same things out of it in the same way.
Wow. Never thought of it that way. That's actually quite interesting.
Well, but as I say, Chris, and what's unique about that is they have remarkably different immune systems. So yeah, while they're both big and they're both eating grass, because that one is a foregut, or the cow is a or a first stomach fiber digester, and the horse is a hindgut, or they digest their grasses and fibers in the colon. That's why horses tend to have a lot of gas. But nonetheless, those differences then create significant or remarkable differences in the immune development of those animals.
Now, see,
so
I would
an
think
infection that a cow wouldn't even blink an eye at can kill a horse literally within hours.
Wow.
That's the difference. And that's why people that have horses have an intimate relationship with their veterinarian. Where dairymen or beef producers, they can have cattle for a long, long time and never call a veterinarian.
It's interesting. Now, see, I would think that because, of course, we're understanding that cows, have gas all the time, which is what's causing, pollution of its own. And that's the only thing we ever hear about. I don't really think of a horse doing it, but then now I'm starting to, put into my mind how they crop dust with their tail all the time, and it just kind of has that moment. I'm starting to get there.
Yeah, well, and the funny sad part about that is there are as many or more horses in the United States than there are dairy cows.
So,
and you never hear that part. You never hear that part of the message.
No. So what it comes down to is it's really not the poor cow that's emitting all of these pollutions. It's really the horses.
Well, that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, right.
It might not be either. It might not be either.
You probably are right.
Let's come back to our companion animals.
Yeah. Well, I'm a really fond person at digressing, and of course, when it comes to talking about dogs and cats or even other animals, bowels, it does tend to take me off path, and so that's on me. Now, one thing I'm curious about is what is infectious claw disease?
Oh, well, infectious claw disease is essentially foot rot. So you've got an organism that lives in the soil. And when you get a break in the skin, those organisms can make their way up in between the skin and cause initially it's a localized infection, but because those bacteria have the ability to digest the skin, you end up with necrotic skin in the interdigital space, i.e. that's why they call it foot rot. But it's a very stinky, nasty infection that we often get in cattle.
Interesting. Interesting. And something that, honestly, I don't think I've ever heard of until I did this research. And I'm surprised it's not something that people hear about.
Well, in reality, most livestock producers do a good job of, number one, managing the health so the animal is more naturally resistant to the infection through it has better skin integrity and it has better immune function. And most of the time, Chris, it only occurs in maybe 1 to 4% of cattle. So the incidence rate's not that high. So that's why you just tend not to hear too much about it. But it is a very painful infection, can cause a systemic infection where the animal gets a temperature and becomes very sick from it. Is not often life-threatening, but causes very painful, severe lameness.
Wow. Now, is that where treatment for foot bathing comes in?
Yes. Yeah. Well, okay, so that becomes a different infection. There's another infection called papillomatous digital dermatitis, which is caused by a treponeme, which interestingly enough, which is also what causes syphilis and causes gingivitis or periodontal disease in humans. But that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of organism that we're talking about. But if cattle get this on their feet, it actually causes an infection that looks like a strawberry wart, but it's a very painful, active ulcerative lesion. And they're very painful. So again, they're not life threatening, but they cause lameness, and then they depress the animal's ability to walk, and so they want to eat less, they produce less.
Wow.
Kind of not unlike if our dog or our cat gets a hot spot,
Yeah, I was thinking
those are kind of the same sort of lesions.
Man, that does not sound like fun at all.
No, they're not. And so when you mentioned foot bathing, that's the solution where a dairy or a beef producer will mix up either a medicated or a copper sulfate or a zinc sulfate foot bath and walk the animal through that to try to control the growth of those organisms on the foot skin.
Wow. So what is something that you've noticed is plaguing farms that maybe we haven't already talked about, or has it been what we've talked about that's plaguing farms right now?
Well, that problem that we just mentioned, the digital dermatitis or the strawberry heel warts, that is a worldwide plague right now. It was first identified in the early 70s in Italy, and interestingly enough, within about probably 15 years, it had essentially been spread to almost all dairy cattle or all regions of dairy cattle throughout the world. And today, at least in dairies that have concentrated production units, it is a major problem. And what I mean by that is, where you have multiple dairy cows in essentially in a confined space, because the organism can live in the manure. And so if your animals are out in a dry climate, it tends to be much less in beef cattle because they tend to be in drier climates and tend to be spread apart where they're not concentrated and living right next to each other.
Gotcha. So it seems like farm animals have their own problems that don't seem to be the same as our house pets. Would you say that there's similarities, that a lot of them are similarities, or is it its own entity of its own?
Well, I think our pets, the challenges that we see in our pets are somewhat unique, mostly because our pets tend to live kind of a cushy lifestyle, or more so than what we see with farm animals. So some of those challenges that we were just talking about with respect to, say, beef cows or dairy cows, it's because they are out standing in wet manure or wet conditions. They're exposed to the inclement weather, where our family companions tend to be pretty well protected from those. But because of that, they are exposed to other challenges, say house dust, or to cleaning agents that we may apply to, say, our bathroom floor or our floors or to our carpets, or due to the fibers in our carpets. So the challenges that our pets are exposed to are remarkably different in many ways.
Interesting. So let's just say we put our dog out in the barn. It's going to have issues with the elements and the environment. You put the cow inside, and it's going to have issues with the environment inside the house. But you flip it, and it works.
Yeah, well, and so the interesting thing about that, Greg, is it's not unlike some of what we see happening in the human population today. And what I mean by that is we see more allergies, we see more asthma in our children today than we saw in the general population 50 years ago.
Yes.
Now, what was different? Well, 50 years ago, much of our population was agrarian. And so going back to your earlier comment, I'm sorry, Chris, is if you look at the dog that is exposed to the barn, as you just mentioned, those dogs tend to be much more resilient to the environmental challenges than the dog that's kept in the house.
Right.
The reason being is exposure. Most doctors will tell you that if your kid got out and played in the dirt, they played in the yard, got dirty. Whereas my wife used to say when our son came home and had dirt all over him, that he's not dirty. It's just he's got all over him. But that exposure challenges your immune system, and that's what strengthens it.
Right.
So the farm dog tends to be much more resilient to the allergens and the other things that cause the common problem of atopy than the house pet. And it's an exposure issue.
It's always so interesting to me, the mutation of how we've as humans, as you were mentioning, how we've evolved, where look at our diets. I mean, we're hopped up on sugars and everything that we know is not good for us, and it's in our foods. And then you look at our dog's food or our cat's food, and the same thing. The carbs are ridiculously high, and the product itself is ridiculously low. And then we say to ourselves, well, why are my dogs not living to that ripe age of 20 anymore, and they're exposed to cancer? 2 out of 3 are exposed to it, and we're all asking ourselves why. Well, the science shows why, and you just said it in the aspect of how a farm dog could go out and have no problem, but most likely my dogs who have a cushy life would probably have a lot of environmental allergies just because they're not in that environment.
Well, exactly, and the other. Unfortunately, as a groomer, you like to keep your dog clean, and you want your dog to look good, have a great coat, to smell good, all of those things. But unfortunately, when you are doing those grooming activities, you're removing good and bad bacterial populations off the skin of that animal.
Yes.
Where, interestingly enough, that farm dog that almost never gets bathed will have a more natural population of bacteria on its skin because you're not altering it with shampoos or other things that move it from the population that it wants to naturally have on its skin.
Right. And I mean, it is that pros and cons. One thing that you'll see with a farm dog, you will see a long hair every so often, but the one thing that you'll notice with a farm dog with long hair, whether it's double or triple coat dog, they are still brushed out. Where that same particular dog, like we have Akitas, and so if we can't bathe them constantly because obviously the oils are it's
right.
It's part of it.
Yep.
They need it, but it's every so often you have to give them a bath. And the thing is let's just say an Akita is out there, it might get some mats from being outside, but a farm dog, they brush them out. They do take care of them in a different way than a regular house dog. I always find that to be interesting.
Yep.
So now Greg has mentioned it already, even yesterday when we were talking. He said, you know what? He's got tons of great stories. So I posed this question on you, and that is, what is the most interesting story since you've been doing this that you've come across? That's a hard one, I know. I have another hard question for you, but I thought, it's that time to throw you, since you're already, relaxed and into this, and now I'm going to give you some hard questions but you have the answer. It's in your head. It's just a matter of figuring which one is your favorite.
Well, it probably one of the harder questions that was posed to me was a call that I got from Ray Reddington some years ago that, interestingly enough, his grandfather started the Iditarod race. And he called me and said, hey, I've got these super athlete dogs, and I need a way to help improve their foot pads. And, how can you help me with that issue? Because I know that Zinpro zinc methionine can help with that. And so it was a bit of a challenge to figure out, okay, how do we take something that is essentially designed for, it's very concentrated. I mean, our minerals are 12,000 milligrams per kilogram, and a dog needs about 40 to 60 milligrams a day. And so it was a challenge in really helping to find a way to get our product to Ray to be able to get into his dog, to be able to improve their health and their foot pad integrity, to help him be a better musher.
Interesting. Now that's an interesting
Yeah.
concept, and to think that they're athletes. I mean, it's
well, and that's it. One of the things that people don't realize, as you exercise your dog more, paying closer attention to the nutrition matters. It's just like the athletes or the Olympians that you see. You watch on television every other year in either the summer or the winter. And if you really listen to them, well, they say, well, I really watch my diet.
yes.
And that plays to the point that you were making just a few minutes ago of, how we feed our dogs or our cats today is more out of the convenience of the feed manufacturer than it is on what is truly meeting that dog's nutritional needs if we looked at how they originally evolved.
Now, out of curiosity, I love to go down the pet food aisle. I find it to be one of my most enjoyable reads of any kind. I love to flip over a bag and just sit there reading the ingredients and laughing as if I'm reading a comic book. And wondering, how is it that you can honestly package this when all it is starches, proteins that they're not even worth the idea of putting, they're really garbage, and things that the dogs will never need. And the things that they do need, well, they're not there. So I don't know how you are, but that is my favorite thing to do, and then I love when people come down that aisle because I'm laughing reading this bag of dog food, which I probably look pretty ridiculous doing so. But I always tend to find somebody who's willing to listen to me rant about it and get on my soapbox. So this is where my next difficult question to you is, what is it that gets you on your soapbox to actually spread this awareness of whatever has you in the front of your mind where you want to share this information? What's got you on the soapbox at this present moment?
Thing that gets me up on a soapbox is, okay, so to your point of walking down the feed aisle, if you want to call it that,
I like that.
80% of the dog food, 80% of the dog food that's out there is grains.
Yes.
All right. So that's why I jokingly say it's the feed aisle. It's not the food aisle. It's the feed aisle. But really, what gets me up on my soapbox about that is because if we're going to feed, and unfortunately, much of the time we do, if we're going to feed our dog like a cow, interestingly enough, it does create challenges to them that affects their ability to absorb nutrients. And yes, we are in the trace mineral business, but what people don't realize is zinc is critical to over 300 enzyme systems and over 3,000 proteins in your body. Or more specifically, it's like the key to your car or your truck. When you put that key in there, it's what brings it to life. Not a very big part, but that's what, and you say, well, what does that have to do with dog food? Well, because when we feed grains to our dogs, there are inherent components in those grains, fiber, phytase, minerals that not necessarily match the balance of what that dog or cat needs, that challenge their ability to absorb trace minerals and more specifically zinc. And it's that challenge or antagonism that then leads to that animal's inability to maintain an adequate supply, to maintain its skin and or its immune system, to keep it from getting these itchy skin problems or this atopic dermatosis that I talked about. So, as Greg said, yeah, I'm a storyteller and I like to paint big pictures to help you understand how these little things are affected by that little thing of, well, you just grabbed the wrong bag off the wrong shelf, and lo and behold, but you notice, Chris, I didn't say that it was a food allergy. Yes. All right. I think there's a huge misconception there. In fact, we've conducted a number of studies with our products looking at immune response and allergies in animals and to their response to different allergens. But the key to that is the true diagnosed food allergies in dogs and cats is extremely low. So there's a bit of a misconception there. But I don't think the problem is so much allergies. You hit the nail on the head. It's carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. We are providing nutrients that are not really what dogs aren't like raccoons. They're not out there plowing down through a cornfield, tearing ears off, and, stripping ears off to live on. Dogs don't leave, dogs are chasing rabbits. They're chasing groundhogs or they're chasing squirrels. They want to eat meat, or cats. They want to eat mice and birds and, other meat sources. And those are the natural ways that our dogs want to eat. Now, do they need a balanced diet? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's not to say that many of the all of these products that are on the shelf are not balanced. Yeah, they're balanced according to AFCO, but they're not necessarily providing the nutrients that our animals need for, as you said, to be able to live 18 or 20 years.
AFCO. That is one of my that is my oh boy moments. And as you can tell, I laugh every time the name even comes up. It makes me laugh. Which now I'm going to pose another. I would say this is pretty easy of a question compared to the two that I just asked you, and it goes in the line of AFCO and FDA. So every time the FDA puts a warning out for let's just say, a raw feeding company, I always laugh because it's always based off of one thing, and it's their favorite child, which is salmonella. And salmonella consumed by dogs. Now, again, we're talking the same amount traces that is in everybody that handles any kind of poultry or even a salad before washing it will have so much traces of salmonella on it. And apparently we're all a breakout of this. But I'm always laughing at the fact that these companies are being targeted by the FDA and AFCO because of salmonella. And I use air quotes, and I know it's a podcast, so you don't see that. But I always find it very funny because a dog eating something, and you just alluded to squirrels, rabbits, mice, birds, etc., there's going to be some salmonella most likely in a wild animal or more. Let's see, dogs and cats, their anatomy actually allows for them to take this in large quantities, not just a little bit, large quantities. Do you ever find out?
Absolutely.
It's just hilarious, right?
Well, it is. And what people fail to realize, I mean, we can all understand what FDA is doing from a protective standpoint, but you're spot on. The risk is not to our pets. The consumption of salmonella, your dog can eat raw chicken. Your cat can eat raw chicken. The risk is not there. The risk is to the human,
right.
the human infection. And unfortunately, though, Chris, is if your dog or your cat consumes a meat or a food that is contaminated with salmonella, of which they normally do, okay, or can, the risk, though, is to the human that may be picking up those feces, or, it might be that your dog's licking your face. I mean, our little Norfolk Terrier, if you pick her up, she's going to be over there giving you a wet willy.
Yep.
She's got her tongue in her ear, and that's the risk. But you're spot on. The risk is not to the pet. Now, what I'm like you, Chris. What rubs you wrong about that is people say, "Oh man, I don't want to buy that food. It's going to kill my dog or my cat." No, it won't. That's not the risk. The risk is to you as the human. But that unfortunately that's not often clear in that message or in that recall message. And that people run, they run for the doors away from that dog food because they say, "Oh, it's contaminated." Well, yeah. So is all that stuff in the yard, but yep. I'm with you 100%.
It's almost telling me that when I read these, and I'll speak just for myself, when I read them, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so the FDA is saying X has so many lots that have trace positive for salmonella, and we've already noticed in over the course of times that those findings are not exactly accurate. But that's beside the point. That's for another objection to go in. The part that makes me laugh is that when they come up with them, it's as if telling all pet parents, you're not smart enough to handle raw food, not even the ones that are for yourself, because you can't demonstrate proper hygiene when cleaning the bowl, when cleaning your hands. And I'll say it from this perspective. We've been raw feeders for a while. My daughter has literally prepared 3 bowls of raw food for our dogs with, vegetables, fruits, different things. So it was a nice balance. And not once has she, who now just turned 11, but she was even 9 at the time, never once had salmonella. I've never had it. So I always look and go, well, you know what? If a kid can do this and doesn't have it, are you really telling us that we're that stupid we can't manage? Just one of those frustrations.
Well, I think that's what's implied. Yes, they're trying to look out for the greater good, I guess. But you're right. I think the warning just needs to be placed out there and then let people make their own decision rather than completely damaging the the financial well-being of a company.
Yes.
Because you found salmonella in it. Well, the odds they were using poultry meal in their food.
Yeah.
and when people say, well, why do they do that? Well, because if you don't, it's going to go to the landfill. It's got to go somewhere,
Yeah, we don't have a good way of breaking it down, and honestly, we couldn't take all of the unfortunate proteins or deceased animals. We can't just put them in a landfill because we would just run out of space. There has been an alternative, but I just don't see where this is that alternative. But again, we're in the same spot. It's just out of confusion.
Well, you're right. I mean, there are alternatives like, you can process them and they can go into the digester and they can be methane, generators to produce electricity.
Yeah.
So there are other ways to do that. The question is that as financially good of a decision?
I get that. Or you can make soil.
Yep.
I mean, it has been proven that can work out very well.
Compost them.
Yes. Yep. And think about that. That honestly makes more sense to me than putting that already garbage part that nobody can eat. It's not human grade, that's for sure. So what makes us say it's actually dog or cat grade? But and another part, you mentioned it and I loved it. You said the feed aisle. That is, I don't know if you were referencing somebody that I idolize, Susan Thixton, but that just popped in my head. I was like, boy, that's just brilliant. I loved it.
Yep.
That was wonderful. So what advice do you have for pet parents, whether small or large, to try to be ahead of all of the problems that are facing our dogs and cats and horses in this unfortunate skin issue?
Well, I think the big thing is number one, try your best to ensure that your dog or your cat or your livestock, whether it's your horses or cattle, are getting a well-balanced diet. But more importantly, when you start to see those, the assumption is most of the time you do. But when you start to see those times when your animal begins to suffer with an irregularity in their skin or in their GI tract. So, if your dog has a consistently upset stool, something's wrong with the GI tract, and it may not necessarily just be an infection. And so that's where this idea of changing the food really does make sense. As you said, Chris, we were jokingly talking about the feed aisle. Well, switch to something, as you say, whether you can go to a completely home-cooked diet of meats and vegetables and be some rice or something like that. It may not be possible, but there are, with a little bit of effort, you can absolutely do some research of reading the back of the bag and say, oh, okay, so this has more natural ingredients. It's basically meats, and then it has some vegetables, and it has fruits in it. But at the same time, make sure that it is well fortified throughout, so that it has minerals or more, and it has the adequate vitamins in it. And don't be afraid to change. If your dog or your cat or your other animals are showing these skin issues, they're absolutely telling you that there's a problem. And certainly consult with your veterinarian, but many times those problems are the result of a nutritional insufficiency or a nutritional imbalance. And, just like veterinarians, as I jokingly say, it's a veterinary practice. Well, what does that mean? They're practicing medicine, okay? When you bring your dog or your cat in, they don't always know exactly what's wrong with it. And they say, well, let's try this. Well, there's a reason they say, let's try this, because they're practicing medicine, But as a pet parent, we need to be willing to do the same thing. We may have fed our dog or our cat the same food for the last 5 years, but now it has this issue. Be willing to do a little research and then look at how can I change the supplement that's available, the supplements that are available to my dog. Go out and get a zinc supplement. Better yet, get one that has Zinpro zinc in it. But look at supplements. Get some fish oil. Get some things that are known to improve the skin and the hair coat, the foot pad integrity, the GI tract of your pet. So take the time, do a little research, and then be willing to make some changes. You're not going to kill them, and very likely you're going to find that nutritionally you can correct the problem without investing, huge amounts of money in medications that are, again, just putting a bandage on your wound.
Right. And that's the big thing right there. So how can people who are listening learn more about Zinpro?
Well, the easy way is just go to Zinpro.com. And once you're in there, if you're a pet parent, you can look around. You can find that you can go straight out to our website for companion animals. And you begin to find the research and the information behind to help you better understand how trace minerals are really foundational to the health of not only our family companions, but us as humans, and certainly all of our livestock at the same time.
Most definitely. Now, did we cover everything, or is there something that we left out that we should definitely have talked about? I know, difficult questions.
Well, I think one of the things that we really do need to hit on is the fact that if your dog or your cat does have a skin problem, many times it is zinc related. And one of the key facts behind that, Chris, is you can't do a blood test to determine that your dog or your cat is zinc insufficient, because the good Lord made it to where we as humans and our animals, unless you are truly deficient, you will maintain an adequate amount of zinc, or more specifically, most trace minerals in your blood. So pulling a blood test and saying, oh, well, the blood looks fine, so it must not be zinc, is really not going to be reflective of the animal's need for that as a nutrient. So as a pet parent, I would encourage you that if your dog or your cat is suffering with skin and coat problems, and even if it has, say, a dull coat, or it has, kind of rough, irregular coat, get a zinc supplement, and you'll be very pleasant. And the quality of the zinc matters. You really do need to get an organic zinc. And ours is specifically listed as a zinc amino acid complex, which is better than a zinc oxide or a zinc sulfate. But get a zinc supplement, and you'll be very likely you will be pleasantly surprised at the results.
That's what it all comes down to, is the science. And it's always going to be the science. And that's how we started everything off, is, some things you can just have to believe in the science and not the Google. And so I liked that.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold on to that one for the day. I think that's going to be the tagline for how this goes, because it makes the most sense. And every dog, cat, horse, cow, etc., are different in their own way, just like all humans are different. So I love that. Well, I really appreciate you, Dr. Tomlinson, for being on. It has been enlightening. It has been a joy. And I just absolutely love being able to talk nutrition. And honestly, I think skin is one of my most favorite organisms of the body. And I love the fact that we're able to talk about it and have a intelligent conversation, to say that. I mean, of course, once we got off of horse farts, we were okay. But you know what? it does happen. And again, you know, I always say we as men never grow up. We laughed about it as kids. We laugh about it as adults. And yet, you know, we can learn a lot from it. Surprisingly, we do learn a lot from a dog who has excessive gas, and I'm sure the same thing applies with a horse, and so on and so on. So,
well, that's exactly right. If you've got a dog with a lot of gas, it means the dog's probably not on the diet that it should be on.
So of course, you know, it always has a weird way of coming around full circle. And how did we get here? But I did enjoy that part. And again, you can learn something from even the humor of it. So I do appreciate you being on the podcast. Come back anytime. I always love talking about this. And don't forget, folks, go to Zinpro. Or I do have to say, Dr. Tomlinson has some great videos where he has been on YouTube and they've done different things. I watched some last night. Had a lot of fun watching them. You were awesome in those videos. You need to do more. That's all only that I'm going to give you on that one.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome.
Well, I'm Chris Green. Have a pet-tastic week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, gotta go, and